Why is it that actually we are still, or most of us are still caught in that box, even if we look at the idea of sustainable development, sustainability, and so on. Post-developmental analysis keep on showing us how that is sort of still based on the same ideas and ideals of economic growth, consumerism, individualism, and so on, which are part of the problem of the bigger interconnected crisis that we are facing. And so I start the book with that now probably admittedly a bit overused quote by Frederick Jameson, who says that basically we are still we are rather able to think about the end of the world at the end of capitalism, right? And I think that is really very weird, because we've seen where this contemporary development model over the last decades, where it has gotten us, and in how much problems we are buried in. And so that was really the point of departure for my whole research. And I wanted to understand better the role that education plays in all this, because as I argue in the book, on one side, education can be a very restrictive tool in a way. I mean, already many people have written about this, how education is being used as a tool to sort of serve the elites, to maintain the status quo, and so on. But usually we tend to think, even especially in the Western world, we tend to think this is restricted to countries where there are dictators ruling, and where people are indoctrinated, and so on, and their education is abused in manifold ways. But actually, if we look at the whole history of modern education, which sort of started with the Industrial Revolution, and has its roots there, we can actually see how from the beginning it has been used in a very narrow way, not really as a tool to empower the masses to do whatever they want to do, and to lead meaningful lives according to their own ideas, but how education has always been used as a tool to reinforce, to recreate, and to perpetuate the status quo. And this is all the more evident nowadays when it comes to the neoliberal development model, which I argue needs to be continuously recreated, and the consensus for it needs to be continuously crafted and recrafted. And education here plays a really powerful role in this, and one is one of the key tools to recreate this, not only this neoliberal development model, but the whole worldview in which this is embedded. So this is the first part I am looking at in my book, as well as today in the presentation. And in the second part, I want to talk more about how can education, if we have a very different idea of what actually is education, how do we approach education and learning, how can it also be a very powerful tool to help us go more towards that idea of post-development, to create our own alternatives to development, or how post-development says it, to move towards the pluriverse. So basically pluriverse as in a world where many worlds fit. So I'm looking into both those aspects, and I want to start with the former aspect, how education still is a tool to sort of recreate the neoliberal development model. And here I'm arguing it's important, of course, that we look at the content of education, or the curriculum that is being given in mainstream education, specifically in schools. But it's also equally important how education is being distributed or imparted. So looking at the hierarchies of knowledge, at the hierarchical teacher-students relations, the role of explanation, and so on. And Basically, what I'm arguing here is that ultimately education basically is a tool that is molding students into good consumer citizens that will just be content with accepting their pre-assigned roles within the development model. And I'm looking in particular today how this is happening in India, where we can see how the Indian state over the last decades has become really a market maker for education rather than its traditional role of being a service provider of education. And it's very clear how in India, the Indian state, together with the private sector, but also with the big development actors from World Bank to bilateral development agencies to non-profit entities, how they basically advance a business agenda of education and in education. So both the privatization of education to the detriment of public education, as well as the content and the pedagogies in education that are especially in schools that are changing towards a more business-minded language and approach to pedagogies based on rational choice theories and so on, all sort of being utilized to anchor that neoliberal mindsets in people. And I draw particular attention to the rise of public-private partnerships in education, or EPPPs in short. Now, this is really an important part in this whole story of neoliberal development and what we can call the deep marketization that really goes into all sectors and corners, now specifically also education and healthcare, which was sort of the last frontiers for the market. And it has a much deeper resonance and influence beyond education itself. The rationale behind those EPPPs is basically to enlist the educational stakeholders, so parents, students, and so on, through the encouraged perception of public school failure. And in India, this has been done very systematically since the 1990s with the introduction of the structural adjustment programs, where public education has been very much delegitimized through various campaigns, not only through funding, but also through defunding rather, but also through the idea that public education is just not adequate, and that everyone, including the poor, should opt for private schools. And there has been like a burgeoning of private schools or low-cost fee private schools and so on. And still the mindset is pretty much there that basically private schools, even the low-fee schools, are much preferable to the public education system. And why that is the case is because if you start to enlist the educational stakeholders in those public-private partnerships and so on, you not only sort of recruit them into these market-mediated solutions, but you are also directing them away from making demands of the state for money, for support, or for anything at all. So it's both a sort of structural reorientation towards the privatization of education, but it also involves a sort of cultivation of individuals as choice-making subjects. And there are many strategies to do that. School vouchers, for instance, also one of them. And people are being told, of course, now you have more choice. You can choose to enroll your kids into private schools, into public private schools, or whatsoever. But the irony with all that is basically that this neoliberal mantra of choice is actually not really, and it does not really mean an increase in choice, right? It's actually just the consequence of the structural destruction of the public education system, which then actually has decreased whatever probably limited choice that was available before. And so over the last years, what has happened in India and elsewhere was that more and more EPPPs have been formed, specifically also with philanthropic organizations who work together with the government as well as with other non-profit organizations to run schools. In my book, I'm looking at one, I think, very important player in the Indian landscape, but also beyond, which is Absolute Return for Kids, or ARK. As you could guess from that name, it's funded by two hedge fund managers. ARK is operating in the UK, in the US, in Uganda, and also in India. Now, I think a year ago or so, they rebranded their schools as People, so they're not called Ark or ARK anymore in India, but they are still financed and organized through ARK. So I'll just continue to refer to them as the ARK schools. When I did my research about this whole story, so to speak, ARK has operated 3 schools in Delhi under this EPP model. So those were former public schools which have been singled out as so-called failing schools by the South Delhi municipal corporations. Those schools, they offer preschool and primary school till grade 5, and they are specifically targeted towards children from low-income communities, and there's an exclusive focus on the subjects of Hindi, English, and maths, which also already shows the sort of further reduction of education to what is now and ironically pretty proudly referred to as minimum learning outcomes. So this term you will encounter especially in those public-private partnership-run schools. You will often hear the term minimum learning outcomes being used, which is a term I guess it's presumably not so much used in any schools that are for the middle classes or for the upper classes. So basically here also important to know that ARK specializes particularly in schools for the poor or schools for the marginalized. Again, schools for the poor is a term which I haven't made up, but which is actually used pretty frequently and without any reflection there. So I just want to show you a little bit how this ARK model works and how this is part of sort of reinforcing that idea of neoliberal development. So for instance, Paul Marshall, he is one of the founders, one of the two billionaires who said in an interview that at ARK, we demonstrate that if you set high expectations, robust discipline, and focus relentlessly on literacy and numeracy, poor children can achieve as well as prosperous ones. Now, what does that tell us? Basically, it already implies that there is a need for special schools for the poor, and that poor children basically need more discipline than prosperous children, that they are not really able to learn on their own, that they don't possess any knowledge, any skills. Basically, they don't possess any education yet. They need special care, special pedagogy, and so on. And this is really a rhetoric that you hear very often from ARK and from other actors, sort of making a discourse for the often alleged backwardness of poor children that then justifies the operations of so-called schools for the poor, where they basically only learn the basic skills. Again, like I said, ARK very stringently focuses on basic numeracy and basic literacy, and only on that. So where they only learn those basic skills, they basically need in order to serve as cheap labor, on which, of course, the current development model depends. And again, this all under the disguise of charity and help, and so on. Now, schools for the poor then not only come with that special curriculum for the poor, focusing on basic skills, but they also come with a special pedagogy for the poor. In the case of ARK, for instance, what they have introduced is what they proudly call the behavior management system. For instance, there's an article on their website which states that, which rather celebrates a transformation in behavior of the students. And it says that, and I quote here, thanks to the introduction of the behavior management system, children started to line up, wait for their turn, follow class rules, and engage in collaborative study and play. Now, again, what we can see here, I feel is clearly very much, I want to say latent, but very much obvious also class bias that sees poor children in sort of need of military, of corporate style, strong leadership, of special pedagogies, and so on. And if you look at other interviews of the founders, if you look at also the interviews that I have conducted, you clearly see this sort of theme reflected all over. Apart from that, the other thing that stood out for me, looking at the pedagogy of ARK schools in particular, was how they sort of include business and entrepreneurship kind of norms and values and behaviors in their school pedagogy, and how they introduce this, and how this is basically being applied as a productive form of power. To give you an example what I mean by that, I'll just want to quote from one interview that I've conducted with at the time the head, who was the head of school at ARK India. Now he says, and I quote here, what we train our teachers to do is to use something called a positive reinforcement. So as an organization, we believe in behavior for learning, not behavior for disciplining. I'm not going to ask you to do this just because I'm 10 times bigger than you and I'm the adult and so on. You should want to do that. You should see the merit in doing that. And you should understand that your choices have consequences. So that's the premise we believe in. Everything is choice-based in our school. The behavior tracker, so this is a tool which you could which you could see, and is prominently exhibited in every classroom. Basically, it comes with 4 smiley faces. So it starts on top. You have a star or a smiling face. Then it goes down to a not so much smiling face anymore. Then it's a neutral face. Then it's a sad face. And it is very much used in every class. And so he says, I quote you again, when the kids come in the morning, they are all stars. All their names are stuck at the top. Now, at the beginning of the day, the teacher reminds them that all are stars. And then it's up to you. If you make smart choices, you stay a star. If you make not so smart choices, you will be coming down. And it was really interesting to see that. So I spent, admittedly, not very long time, but 2 hours across 2 different classes. And it was really intriguing for me to see how this tracking tool has been used like a lot, especially also in the first grade. So already after a few minutes in the morning, so I joined the first hour of classes there. Already after a few minutes, then the teacher started to grade some children down, and this was also announced prominently, like the teachers going there using the tracker and calling out the names and saying you are graded down to this and this. And already even within the first hour I was there, two to three children basically reached the lowest phase of the tracking tool, which was the set phase, which then in effect meant that their playtime was completely cancelled. And playtime, again, as far as I could tell, there's only one playtime, which is during lunch break, basically for 30 minutes. So as a consequence, that was cut out for them. And yeah, I could really see this also in the class, how the teacher would continuously stress how it is each child's own choice where they would end up on the tracking tool. So this was really very much, very heavily used in the class while I could observe this. And of course, this goes back, this strong emphasis of choice goes back to reflecting the transition or the shift of the development paradigm from the individual as a citizen to the individual as a consumer or as a customer who is expected to act in all settings and all circumstances according to those principles of rational choice theory. And again, choice, like I said before, of course, being a key component of the neoliberal philosophy. I just want to end here with one more quote, which shows how it is not only this sort of pedagogy of choice that is being used, but how also very consciously and very intentionally an atmosphere of competition is being created in across the whole school life. And competition, of course, another neoliberal mantra, only the fittest survive, only the best can win, we all live in a dog eats dog world, and so on. And this is really also very prominently visible as a theme in the whole pedagogy of that school. I'll just quote a little bit more from my interview with the ARK head of school. So he says, or he told me that basically ARK provides a tremendous amount of opportunities in the class to appreciate kids. So it's interesting how this kind of competition is being framed also. So he goes on to say, there are teams, each team gets points, each student has a pouch in the class, and they collect coupons. The student get coupons for every time they are doing well, and at the end of the day, we count who has the most, and they are the student of the day. At the end of the week, we count who has the most, and they become student of the week. We put their picture outside the classroom. We also have a best class trophy. So in the corridors, there's a tracker, yet another tracker, which is a simple bar graph. Your class can earn stickers for walking down to playtime quietly and coming back without disturbing anyone else. At the end of the month, whosoever's bar graph is the tallest, they get the best class trophy in front of the whole school, and that trophy sits in your class for 1 month. We also have school values. We use an acronym called REACH, that stands for respect, exploration, achievement, courage, honesty. And he says at the end of each month, we pick 3 students from each class that have shown these values, and we appreciate them in front of the whole school by giving them certificates. Now, again, all of this, I argue, is very much intended to make students feel as if they are in a race against each other, where there are only few winners, and it sort of really incentivizes children to become those kind of individualistic, hyper-competitive human beings, who are born into that hyper-competitive, unequal world, where the winner takes it all, and sort of very much feeds into that recreation of the neoliberal development model. And so this is just one case study where I show how this is being done. And if we look at what's happening currently in India, but also globally, this kind of trends of privatization of public-private partnerships in education really is very much set to intensify and accelerate. Even if we look at the Indian National Education Policy 2020, which is the newest policy that has just been adopted last year, there is clearly mentioned a further push for the increase in EPPPs, especially also with focus on including more philanthropic actors in EPPPs. And organizations such as ARK having a very questionable understanding of education rooted in quantifiable minimum learning outcomes and having a very questionable pedagogy embedded in those neoliberal values, underpinned also by a clear class bias, I would say, are the ones who unfortunately stand to benefit the most from this. So this was the first part I wanted to talk about, to give you an idea of what is the current situation of mainstream education in India, but also with global ramifications, as Ark, like I said, is also active elsewhere, especially also in UK. They have a lot of those charter schools and so on. So this is really, I think, a very important topic to also look at. I'll take a quick water sip and then I'll go to the next part and the last part. So in the next part, what I want to talk about is basically if we have, at least in my case, if we more or less give up hope that the mainstream model of schooling can sort of help us to question and overcome this hegemonic model of development. What kind of education can actually help us to do that? So what kind of education will help us to think out of the box, to reimagine development and find new ways of creating meaningful lives outside this dominant model of development? And what I'm arguing before I'm getting there is that while, of course, this privatization and the formation of public-private partnership is probably one of the most negative developments in the education sector over the last few years, we would be misguided if we just start to glorify the public mainstream education system and just say we should advocate only for public schools and we should go back there and everything will be fine, right? So you could, of course, argue that this is a slightly better a better way to have a functioning public education system. I also would argue the same, but at the same time, I'm arguing it's not really a solution to come up with those excessive ideas to the problems we are facing, to come up with those new visions of what kind of lives do we want to live. And this is, I argue, because modern schooling from its very beginning very much has been designed according to an authoritarian disciplinary structure. The shift that we can observe today is basically in the role of schools from first and foremost after the Second World War, mostly creating good citizens of the nation states, towards nowadays creating good consumer citizens, which are situated within that state market nexus. So I'm making the case first that, okay, both neither the privatization of education nor a rollback to public education as it currently is practiced is really a solution. And I'm looking sort of for a third way then. And here what I found very interesting and what I'm drawing on largely in my book is the anarchist perspective of education, which is usually overlooked or outrightly ignored, mostly because basically anarchist philosophy tends to describe or tends to conceptualize education as a sort of prefigurative politics, not as this neutral tool that others pretended to be, but as conscious prefigurative politics that sort of sets out on the micro scale the model for the way that we want to live in across larger society. And what I'm looking at in particular is the political philosophy of Jacques Rancière and his principle of what he calls the presupposition of equality. Now, this principle basically says everyone is equally intelligent. That doesn't mean that we are in the sense of that we all can exactly do the same things and we will score the same results in our A levels or wherever. It doesn't mean that. What it means is more a sort of a basic intelligence, right? That we are, or most of us are basically able to talk with each other, communicate with each other, understand each other, interpret the world based on this and come to our own conclusion. So it's talking about a very basic sort of intelligence that all of us have. And drawing on Todd May, how I interpret this is basically this equal intelligence. What it ultimately says is that everyone is able to create their own meaningful lives alongside each other and with each other. Now, what is important when we look at this principle of equal intelligence is not that we sort of have to rationally and scientifically prove everyone is equally intelligent. That would probably be pretty much impossible. But that we start from this presupposition, we experiment with these assumptions, and we act out of this assumption and see where it actually leads to. So Rancière is saying, for instance, it is true that we don't know that everyone is equal. We are saying that everyone might be. This is our opinion, and we are trying, along with those who think as we do, to verify it. But we know that this might is the very thing that makes a society of humans possible. Now, what that shows is basically that this presupposition of equality doesn't go back to any kind of human essence or something like this. It's merely a political assumption on how we should structure social relations among each other and with each other. And what I'm arguing in my book is that it is precisely this, if you think of it, pretty radical political assumption that makes this presupposition of equality into what I call an ontological politics, or a world-making practice, which has the potential to challenge and go beyond the limits of the developmental worldview. Why? Because especially if you look at development and the dominance of development experts and the expert-led interventions, development clearly says you are not able to create your own meaningful lives, right? You need someone else to come in and to tell you what is a meaningful life and then to help you get there, right? Whereas this assumption of radical equality basically turns this completely on the head. It says all of us are actually capable of creating meaningful lives alongside each other. So what this also entails is basically a potentiality or a political potentiality. So it is basically the capacity of ordinary people to discover modes of action to act upon common affairs. And what I'm arguing is that this, whatever you want to call it, presupposition of equality, political potentiality, it also needs to be cultivated. It doesn't come out of nowhere, right? Or you could even argue that schools, mainstream schools in particular, decultivate this, right? Because from the beginning, you are dependent on the teacher, you are dependent on explanations from others, you are always trying to reach some knowledge. Everyone tells you you don't have any knowledge yet. You need others, you need experts to help you. You yourself are not able to understand this and so on. So it really deconditions you, right, from that presupposition of equality. And what I'm looking for is what kind of education actually would sort of cultivate that presupposition of equality in us. And here I'm looking particularly at what is called unschooling or self-designed learning, which is a growing movement in India. You have now, at the time of my research, it was estimated around 10,000 families who are practicing radical unschooling. And then you also have a lot of platforms, a lot of spaces who are offering people to come and do self-designed learning. Now, what do I mean by self-designed learning? It's basically, we can define it as a learner-centered, a democratic approach to education, which is putting the learner's passions and interests first. So there's no pre-given curriculum, there are no teachers, or it's rather that people can pick their own teachers, they can learn from a huge variety of different resources. They decide what they want to learn on their own. They decide also why they want to learn it, for what they want to learn it, and so on. So it goes very much away from this whole model of schooling. And as I'm arguing, it is precisely because it is acting out of that presupposition of equality. It sees everyone as equally intelligent, including children also, who can make their own decisions of what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, and why they want to learn it. And in my book, I'm looking at a few different case studies because also since unschooling or self-designed learning is a very individual approach to education, there are a lot of different forms, a lot of different approaches to it. So I'm looking, for instance, at one unschooling space, which is interestingly situated within a school in Delhi. I'm looking at a university, Swaraj University, which is targeted towards teenagers and young adults who are seeking like different pathways for themselves. I'm looking into that radical unschooling among families, which is mostly practiced in that case among middle class families who have access to specific resources and so on. And I'm looking at Project DeFi and their NUC model of self-designed learning, which I find one of the most interesting cases because this is specifically targeted towards marginalized communities. And it's already an example because the first thing when you will hear from others when you talk about unschooling, self-designed learning, and so on, the first thing usually you hear is that, but isn't that something only for rich or richer people because you need access to particular resources and so on. And the NUC model of self-designed learning is showing that it actually isn't if you provide free access to or what Ivan Illich, for instance, has called the learning web. So if you provide access to resources, to tools, to know-how, to a network of potential mentors and peer-to-peer learners, and so on. So I want to end by talking a little bit about this NUC model of self-designed learning, just give you a basic overview of it. And before I'm doing this, I thought of showing you a brief 2 to 3 minutes video, which just gives you an idea of how such a space looks like. So I'll just share my screen. All right. Can you see it? Can you see the screen? Okay, then I just play the video.
In schools, the teachers teach their own experience, but here we get to know what is our idea and we can implement it.
Class we get little bored, but teachers will be teaching us, will get bored. There won't be that fun, but here we are only browsing, we are only learning.
I'm not education or degree and all. I'm studying very 5th standard only. But I like a daily want to come, want to learn something. So just like a friends, we all enjoy. They're all little young children. They don't know any difference, age group or not.
Got her idea, yeah. She directly fix the thing to the battery, so that if she take out the battery, it will be totally dismantled. Check whether it's working or not. Yeah, it's working though.
Teachers, sometimes they may be tough or we can't ask them doubts. Here, there's no doubts. Even if we have doubts also, we can ask someone and clarify, because all our friends here, we have that easygoing thing, because she's my friend, okay, I can ask her. If there is a teacher, there is some kind of fear, oh, she might scold me, oh, she might think something bad.
ಸೊ ಆ ಜಾಗ ಸೆಟಪ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಅದಾದಮೇಲೆ ನಾನೇನನ್ನ ಕಲಿಬೇಕಂತಂದರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಫ್ರೀಯಾಗೆ ಕಲ್ತ್ಬೋದು. ಆದರೆ ಒಂದು ವಿಷಯ ಏನಂತ ಅಂದರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರು ಟೀಚರ್ಸ್ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಮತ್ತೆ ಯಾರು ಗೈಡ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ, ಅಂದರೆ ಆ ಜಾಗದ್ದು ನೋಡ್ಕೊತಾರಲ್ಲ, ಇನ್ಚಾರ್ಜ್ ಅವ್ರು ಇರ್ತಾರೆ. ಜೊತೆಗೆ ನಾವು ಯಾವ ಥರ ಕಲಿತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಅಂದರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅಕ್ಕಪಕ್ಕ ನಾವು ಜನಗಳೇನಿರ್ತೀವಿ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಟಿ, ಒಂದು ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿ ಥರ ಆಗ್ತೀವಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿ.
From battery acts as electrical energy and converts to mechanical energy, so that the wing rotates and produces air, and from here air comes.
I made one robot. So now second I'm trying to car. I want to make a car.
Because of the school surrounding, they allowed me to work here. So I said no, still I'll not get married till 1 year. I'll not get married. I'm trying them to say, but my mother is not listening. Girls should work, ma'am. They should not sit at home. Olden days they're saying, but now it is changed. All are equal. We should also work. We should stand on our foot. We should not depend on others for any other cause. We should work, ma'am.
All right, so that was just a short video of what such a self-designed learning space looks like, and what, among other things, is being done there. I want to end, I think, in the next 5 minutes, if that's okay, just by giving you a brief overview of how this model works. So it starts with an induction program for new learners, which is about 45 days long. And so the main idea here is to start this deconditioning of learners and to get them towards the presupposition of equality. Why? Because basically most of the learners, again, they come from marginalized communities. They are very much conditioned with that thought that they get at times from school, where they have upper caste teachers, for instance, which comes also from their own families and from society in general, that if you're born in this and that caste, if your mother, if your father have this and this job, for instance, be it a rickshaw driver or a maid or something, then the best you can aspire to is also to just do that, right? So this ingrained idea of inequality, sort of, that your fate, sort of, if you want to call it that, is predetermined, and the only thing you can aspire to is to continue the way to live how your parents live, is very much ingrained in them. And what that leads to is basically sort of hesitance to explore new things, to try out new things, to even start to thinking about what is it that I am interested in, what kind of passions do I have, what kind of dreams and aspirations do I have, right? So the induction program is set to start of breaking down those mental barriers. How is this done? Basically by, on one side, doing a lot of hands-on projects together. So every induction program there will be a number of various projects that are being done together with the learners. It could be, it ranges usually from urban gardening to carpentry, to metalworks, to poetry, to music, to dance, to web design, coding, programming, 3D design, and so on. So as much different things as possible, and also as much new things as possible, which the learners either didn't have access to, didn't even know they could do it, or just have no experience about it. Just to give them an idea that if you can do something like this, then imagine what other 100,000 millions other possibilities you have to do, right? So again, this is, I'm arguing, starting to sort of cultivate that presupposition of equality, that we all are equally intelligent, and we all can do whatever we want to do. And apart from this, in this induction program, there's a lot of community building going on. So you have a lot of daily talks, conversations, where the learners are really encouraged to talk about things that, and issues that they are interested in, that they want to learn about, and so on. So it's not just that they're coming there for learning itself, but it's also about building a community of learners, which is also a very important aspect here. And at the end of this induction program, what happens then is that the learners are being asked to develop a goal for themselves, which they will be pursuing for the next 3 months they spend in the NUC. So these goals, they can choose freely whatever goal they want to have. And there's a lot of questioning around it, right? There's a lot of, first of all, there's this principle of ikigai is introduced. So it's a mix of, if I remember it correctly, there's those 3 or 4 circles. Maybe some of you have seen it. One is what am I good at? Second one is what do I like doing? Third is what can I earn money with? And then the fourth one is something like what is good for the planet, or something like this. And so this concept is being introduced bit by bit. And then learners form some small group of 2, 3, or 4 people, sometimes also individual projects, that is individual groups, that is really up to them. And they come up with their own idea of a learning goal for the next 3 months. And there's a lot of questioning going on. Again, the NUC facilitator who is there will ask them, so why are you doing this goal? How is this relevant to you? And so on. Like, again, to make them think more about what is it that I really want to do. And after this, they basically have 3 months time to pursue their goals. And already in the induction program, there's a lot of sort of practice around how can I build my learning goals. So what are the different learning sources I can use? There's on one side a lot of emphasis on using laptops, on using online tools, be it open online learning courses, be it YouTube tutorials, be it sites like websites like instructables.com and others, which have like projects that others already did. And with exact manuals, how you can do it, and so on. And also looking into the community itself, like what knowledge is actually already available in the community itself. For instance, one thing that is also happening in the induction program is what is called community treasure hunt. So basically, all the learners are asked to, that they get a list of like 30 things that they need to find in the community. For instance, one could be, let's say, someone who is brilliant at painting in the community. Another one could be a space or a place where you can find books, or the next one could be a person that can tell stories really well, or something like that. Like, it could be really anything. And learners are asked to go out in the community to find to find people, to find places, to find resources in the community. Again, to cultivate that idea that everyone in your local community also knows something. There's not a scarcity of knowledge like we learn in school, but there's actually an abundance of knowledge all around you. And then the learners are basically being supported in breaking down their goals into milestones. So if I have this or that 3 months goal, how can I break it down into specific skills, into specific knowledge that I need to acquire, and how can I reach that? And throughout the 3 months, they are going to pursue their goal. And at the end of the 3 months, there are some internal reviews first, where everyone is looking, have you achieved your goal? If not, then that's also okay. You're not getting any grades, neither good or bad grades. You can decide yourself, do you want to take this goal forward in the next goal cycle? Do you want to do something else? And so on. And after this, there's a huge community event usually, where learners come together with community members who are looking at what have the learners done, who are trying out their products, who are looking at whatever they have done, and so on. And it's basically a huge celebration of the achievements. And then again, the next goal cycle start. And like I argue, all of this basically, this whole concept of the NOOC is basically there to cultivate that presupposition of equality in people. And I think I want to conclude with that, which I feel is very important. So we should not expect that miracles happen overnight, that all of a sudden after 3 months in the NOOC, people start to abandon their livelihoods and what else, because a lot of them are very much and very deeply entrenched in the current development model, right? So for them, it's more of creating a space and creating time and creating routine for them to bit by bit cultivate that presupposition of equality, and then again see where it leads to. So there are no predetermined outcomes that at the end of 3 months, at the end of 6 months, that the learners should do this or this, right? It's really up to them what they want to do with it, and it's just a space which is one of the opportunities how this presupposition of equality can be cultivated. And I think, yeah, I think I overused my time. So I'm gonna end here and look forward to your questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Well, obviously you didn't overuse, but the more, well, we lose time for discussion, which is always also obviously what we want to spend time with. So thanks very much for this very exciting presentation. And you started off with giving us this, the big narrative of the neoliberal ideology and how dominant and prevalent that still is. And I think even though you talked about India, I think we can see this model of the privatization of education, of the commodification of education, like in many countries, as you said, the US, the UK, but also around Europe. And I also think that this uncritical view of education on as the mean to progress or for advancement, I think it's also a large part in the Agenda 2030, and that may be also the reason why in some ways it is promoted in that way. So yes, I want to invite everyone to ask questions or comments or anything you would like to respond to Christoph, and give you a few moments time. Maybe I can kick off with the first question and take you up on the question you posed in the beginning. First of all, the question of what kind of education will help us to get out of the development paradigm, and then the question, what is the pathway towards the pluriverse? And you kind of describe this radical unschooling as one possible pathway, possibly. But I wondered, to what extent is this presupposition of equality different to the very neoliberal narrative of, everyone can make it to millionaire, everyone, you only have to work hard enough, and this narrative of, if you fail, then it's obviously your own fault. So to what extent does that actually provides us with a new with a new pathway, or with a new idea of also creating or designing societies together? Because I think that's also one large part of the pluriverse, to live convivially and not this very individualistic perspective which you described in the beginning. So maybe,
No, that's a good question, and interestingly, especially when it comes to unschooling, I was at first pretty surprised as well that this is also being used at times from or by neoliberal think tanks or so on to argue against public education and so on. So there is some sort of a really clarification that is needed and distinction to be made. I think first and foremost, what is important that the unschooling or the self-designed learning I am talking about, how I have seen it in India, is community-based, which is a big difference. That means the idea is not that everyone is on their own and tries to compete against the other and makes the best out of it, but it is a very community-based approach. And where I showed how in the ARK case that kind of competition is being cultivated, what I could see in all those forms of unschooling and self-designed learning I've observed is that basically what is cultivated here is cooperation, peer-to-peer learning, caring for one another, supporting one another, and so on. And I think that is a very big difference. So again, that's why I'm saying it acts as a sort of a prefigurative politics, right? Because you're doing in the small scale what you envision, what the society on a larger scale could more look like. And this is very obvious. Like I've seen it in many examples. For instance, I remember when I went to that creativity other, which is the unschooling place, ironically within a school, where people come and you have kids of teenagers of all age, like 10 to 17, working on projects together, learning together. There's a community media lab, for instance, where they go out in the local community, they do films about problems that are existing in the local community, but they are also, for instance, documenting the professions of local people. That they are talking about getting to know the lives of a rickshaw driver or of a vegetable seller, and they're also showing the good sides of the community and so on. There are people, there's a cooking hub where I think 5 to 10 kids cook every day for 30, 40 kids who are coming to that school. And for instance, I've seen it several times. They go out on their own to offer food to the poor in the community, and all these things. So there are many, many examples, I feel, where you see that one thing is community-based learning is there, which is very much different from the neoliberal idea, where you have intergenerational learning, like you could also see in that short film about the Nook model, where you have people of all age, gender, social backgrounds working together towards a common goal and so on. And the whole ethos is a different one, like being based on cooperation, on learning from each other, with each other, and so on. But yeah, there is some, if you don't look at this, there is some danger that this is sort of being derailed and put on the neoliberal agenda for sure.
Yeah, thanks. Everyone, are there any more comments, questions to Crystal? Anna, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for this inspiring talk and the inspiring book, because I think you did a very good job of showing all these examples of of alternatives, and I think picking this realm of education as an example and as a pathway to the pluriverse seemed very convincing to me, because I think it is precisely the opposite of the model that we are being presented usually. What we're being presented is, yes, there's poverty, but education is the solution, as if education would somehow change things other than maybe the individual fate. So, I mean, we all know there are some dishwashers becoming millionaires through education, but for the vast majority, everything stays the same, and the inequality is just being legitimized.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in general, I'm just convinced that you're doing a great job. But one thing I wanted to ask is, you portray the mainstream education system as one which is producing individualistic, hyper flexible, neoliberal people which come out as a result of this system. And one thing I was asking myself is, like, when I look at me or Julia or you, I really wonder. So, is it all that? I mean, I wonder if this standard mainstream education system or higher education system also produces also people like us, then is it that bad? Is it that binary, or are there maybe elements that actually we could work with?
Yeah. No, it's a really good question, and I mean, I'm wondering this myself, even doing my PhD and even writing this book, right? Because ironically, this is based on my whole PhD research, which is very much mainstream education, and here I am arguing for a shift in all that. But so one point is I focused more on the school-based system, because I really feel that here is where the biggest problem is. Of course, in higher education, there are a lot of problems too, but for instance, in my case, only through higher education, I actually got the privilege to even engage with those kind of questions, right? So I don't really have a good answer for that. I guess I'm also asking that myself, but I think it's really a combination of a lot of things. For instance, I mean, I would think for myself, I was lucky enough to have like a lot of freedom to choose after school, what do I want to study. I could go abroad, study elsewhere, make new experiences. A lot of people can't do that. If we look in India, for instance, we see how kids are being really conditioned from school onwards, from when they are young, that you should become a doctor, engineer, or a lawyer, right? This still holds very well, and the school track still is like this, that you choose either science, you choose commerce, or you choose arts, and arts is the most looked down upon. So there is a clear hierarchy of knowledge, a clear hierarchy of what is sort of pushed through the education agenda, what is a desirable job, what is a desirable way of how to live your life, and so on. But of course, it's not perfect, right? And thank God we are not 24/7 only surrounded by schools and all that, and we can make our own experience. But yeah, I think it's a mix of individual experiences, of also the freedom, the opportunities we get, and then I guess there are people like you and me and Julia and Adriana and others who are maybe I mean, I don't want to overstate this. Also, we are also just human beings, but we are in the minority, I guess, still in that, right? I mean, how many scholars in Germany are doing research on post-development, and how many are following the usual mainstream development school of studies and all that, right? So of course it's not like this. I think you can't overstate it that schooling is this mechanistic thing that automatically sort of you go in and you come out as a what I call a good consumer citizen, but it has that tendency to really shape you towards that way, or make you predisposed toward that way, and that goes then in tandem with other things, what you hear and see in the media, what you hear from politicians, what you hear from businessmen and women and so on, right? So that all comes together, and I think within this whole what you call within this whole assemblage, education is one of the most powerful tools, but thank God it's not perfect. That's how I explain it.
Thanks.
Are there any more hands?
I might have exhausted everyone by talking too long.
Well, if not, I actually want to follow up because that's a question we've been discussing for a long time now within the project. Is the question of normativity and the question of, as you said, you know, obviously, like for example in India, the engineering degrees are much more desired than, you know, the arts or whatever. So you know, can you blame people for, you know, choosing the most promising career path, and can you blame people for you know, making demands for, you know, more material wealth? And again, then coming back to this position of privilege of, you know, us, where we can argue about, you know, the pathways to the pluriverse from very secure and comfortable positions. Yeah, coming back to the question you posed in the beginning, you know, how can education be a powerful tool for emancipation, for whatever, but then, you know, who decides what is emancipatory, and to what, you know, to what degree is it a problem that people buy into what, you know, we define as the neoliberal destructive ideology of development progress and so on and so forth. But, you know, there's this problem of you know, yeah, of defining the norms around what is desirable, what isn't.
So that is something also I think I struggled quite a lot with, especially initially, and I also got to hear sometimes that hey, you're coming in as a white scholar telling people in India they should not go to school and all that. So you really have to think, okay, what do you actually argue? So I think there are different arguments you can make. First of all is let's look at the facts, be it in India, also elsewhere. Was schooling ever a path out of poverty? For some, of course, yes. For the vast majority, it wasn't, it hasn't been. If you look at all statistics of increased access to education in India or elsewhere, which really has increased a lot over the last decades, it doesn't show any proportionality with lower levels of poverty, with lower levels of inequality. You actually see the opposite, and you can, if you look at the data, you can very well make a case that I think, like Aram also said before, mainstream education in its contemporary form, it's rather cementing existing inequalities rather than sort of abolishing them. And then the question is, okay, what is the alternative? And I think people should, first of all, should have a real choice, not in the neoliberal sense, but in the choice that they can actually look for an education that is relevant for them. That's why I also think that this MOOC model of learning is one of the most promising ones, because it doesn't really force you to just abandon your old life and say like, now you should not go to school, now you should not do this or that. You have to dedicate 24/7 now to this kind of education, right? It's more like, what kind of education can we have that sort of helps people to really find out what they are interested in, right? And schooling is compulsory, right? Be it in Germany, be it in India to a certain age. So you can't choose it. Unschooling, self-designed learning spaces, you can choose it, right? You're not forced to do it. And then the question becomes, what is more effective for you, right? First of all, you're not being forced to go there, but if you try it out, it might be much more useful for you. I mean, I know from Project DeFi and the MOOC model, so now I'm working with Project DeFi for the ones who don't know. So we get a lot of testimonies from people who actually tell us, for instance, even children or teenagers, 14, 15 years old, who tell us, we would love to spend much more time in the MOOC because we actually acquire some real skills that are useful in our daily lives. We don't like to go to school. Now, of course, we don't go and tell them, you should not go to school. We are not supposed to do that, right? And again, we would get probably a lot of issues with the parents who still believe in that model. But we can see that change happening, and we can see that once people have come to the MOOCs for several of those goal cycles, who have acquired skills and so on, that they also recognize that value, and that they see, okay, this is actually more applicable to us, and this is also helping us a lot more than whatever we could have learned in school, right? But again, it has to be an individual choice. What I'm not saying is that now we must abandon all schools and we have to force everyone to go to unschooling or self-learning spaces, right? But there has to be more like a level playing field where you can actually opt for one or the other. I mean, the problem is, especially now what we're facing, for instance, in our learning spaces, is that we don't give out degrees or certificates. And again, as long as you have some school degree certificate, you might not have any sort of skill, but it is recognized by people. If you come from one of our learning centers, you might have acquired a lot of skills, but no one is recognizes it unless you convince them, right? And often you can show it by the project you have done, but it's a much more arduous way to do this, right? So there are a lot of imbalances, and I guess what I'm arguing for mostly is like leveling the playing field, and then people can make their own choice, what is actually more useful for them. I don't know if that answered your question to a certain degree.
Yeah, there's still a few moments for those of you who haven't spoken yet. So now is the chance if you want to come in.
Can I ask a very quick question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so in a meanwhile, I haven't read the book, but I kind of able to extract your thesis. So I was going through your thesis, and you have used a post-colonial aspect, and you also in your talk also talked about idea of development, and in terms of how education. So in a higher education, how do you see that challenges which imposed by so-called by the Western ontological references, and so now currently what is happening in in current political regime, they are trying to undo those past ontological, categories, and now they are trying to narrate their previous history in their own way. So, do you think that it is kind of a reimposition of a same ideology or ideology or colonization of education, which is happened in or happening in the process of westernization? So it is a kind of colonization which populism takes ahead towards their making their own history.
So I don't think the question is only about is higher education a Western model that is imported and so on. I think in broader, is it what are the challenges in higher education that we have, that as well as in the Western part of the world, as well as in South Asia and elsewhere, sort of perpetuate and recreate this neoliberal development model I was talking about, right? And I feel that there's several parts to it. So one, of course, is that access to higher education, right? You can only get the access, you can only be part of higher education if you made it through the school-based model, right? And often, again, like I explained, if you follow the whole modern education system, you are already a schooled person, which means by the time you enter higher education, you often, not always, again, like you can see here, but often you come there with a certain specific mindset. You still have the same issues of the hierarchization of knowledge. You still have that issue of the dominance of intellectual labor and work over practical work, over hands-on things and so on. And I think you have to see the whole modern education system as in its entirety, right? So what I mean is that you can't see higher education without the school-based education that comes previous and so on. So basically, my take is that when it comes to higher education, you still have a lot more freedoms than in school when it comes to choosing what you want to study, when it comes to approaching your studies and all that. But it's really, I mean, the field is already narrowed, right? The field is already, once you come out of school, you're already predisposed to certain things. I mean, you can see the kind of courses that are offered in universities. You can see how most of the money is being put in business and economics department to the detriment of social science, and especially critical social sciences. You can see it in the choice of curriculum, where we're still mostly Western texts and so on are much preferred, and in a lot of things. But again, I think I'm not making this an issue of sort of the colonization of education, but seeing it both on a global level. What kind of systemic change do we need on a global level? And I focus mostly on the school-based system, but yeah, definitely those points I mentioned, and there are lots more where we can see that higher education also is still very much part of that developmental worldview, right? Yeah, I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, well, we're at the end of the session, and well, given it's evening, I don't want to keep you longer than necessary, and let you enjoy the rest of the evening. So thanks very much, Costa, for joining us and for giving this this very inspiring talk. And I'm sure, given that there's not only one pathway to the pluriverse. I'm sure we'll be in future conversation and dialogue about the pluriversal pathways that maybe.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for joining and sharing your work.
For being there and your really interesting questions.
And of course, thanks everyone for joining.